Welcome to Let's Talk Special Economic Zones, raising awareness of the impact of SEZs on people, planet, profits, and governance with Ainsley Brown.
Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown, and in today's episode, we're going to look at government to government, the government to government zone development or investment model, depending on how you want to look at it. And this is where zones are developed not just by the private sector, although the private sector can be involved in it, as we'll come to explore. But the genesis of the zone is a deal between two governments. So, as I usually do to kick off these episodes, we explore what exactly is a zone. And part of the challenge with the definition is that zones are very broad and different terms are used essentially to capture the same thing. So, you may hear special economic zones, you may hear free zones, you may hear industrial parks, you may hear foreign trade zones, enterprise area. It's all the same thing. It's a geographic space that has special rules that apply to it, that a government has declared it as such, and typically are associated with different rules from the rest of the economy, particularly around trade. One good example is that, goods that are usually attract duties, once they go into the zone and remain there, don't attract duties, customs duties, that is. That's a form of incentive that they use. There's other incentives that may be used that, reduced corporate income tax or um, deals around reduced land taxes and value added taxes, etc., or even non-fiscal or financial incentives may be used at times. But in terms of the zone development model, where governments kind of deal between each other, it's an interesting one because it's been used, for example, very successfully by the Singaporeans in China. They've used it in Suzhou. They've used it in Tianjin and I think Chongqing as well. Um, but they've used it quite successfully, essentially to extend and this is something that to explore. Why do governments want to do this? And there are different reasons. One, it can be to grow your market, or extend your industrial capability. Singapore, for example, being a small island, uh, versus the very big China, it both expanded and grew markets, and also grew its industrial capability. It also um, created a revenue source, in that, rents and so forth would come back to Singapore. Over time, one of the things they did was they had a certain split. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it was 60-40 in terms of ownership. Singapore, because they built it, although it's based in China, had 60%. But then after several years, it flipped. So then the Chinese got 60% and the Singaporeans controlled 40% of the ownership stake. And then within that, there was much more layers on top of that. So there was the operational side of things, which is 60-40. And then layered on top of it was more the political side of things, or government to government side of things with the steering committees and the like being on top of that, that would direct it from a policy perspective, right? So that's another interesting thing about these zones. These zones are a form of foreign relations. So they're not just strictly commercial. So it's somewhat of a hybrid type of system where it's commercial and also yeah, foreign policy or diplomacy attached or associated with it. The Even though it's government to government, the private sector is still involved typically because the private sector is the one that would typically build it, or they may even retain a ownership stake in it. It depends um, on the model chosen, and but you still have that governmental layer of both sides being associated with it. Again, Singapore has also used it quite successfully, and they're about to do it again with their neighbor, Malaysia. in terms of building zones that are in Malaysia or Malaysian territory, but are Singaporean, for want of a better term. And they're about to do that again on another set of, or on an island near to Singapore, extending its reach, extending its market, extending its industrial capability, which is confined or limited by the size of Singapore. So it's one of those things that will help. Um, the Japanese as well have jumped into the fray, and they have, for example, done an arrangement with the Bangladeshis, to build out a quite substantial zone. They're also, I think, in talks right now with the Sri Lankans around that, and also they are advancing in Kenya. Um, they're advancing in Kenya as well in terms of a government to government type of arrangement, and of course Japanese companies coming into those zones again, um, growing their markets, growing their industrial capabilities, but also adding more resilience to the Japanese supply chain, because it diversifies where their production takes place. It also mitigates against natural disasters that happen in Japan, unfortunately, quite frequently, earthquakes and tsunamis and the like. So those sorts of things are done as part of this whole government to government arrangement. It's as I said, it's quite an interesting model. It's different. It's not one of those ones that's just government led or private sector led. It's both governments coming together, and it's somewhat hybrid because it has an international cross-border element to it in terms of two countries coming together. But then there's a commercial element that's below. And depending on the country, the host country's public-private partnership structure or strictures, that may dictate how the private sector, the local private sector, what their role will be in it. And there's almost always a role for that private sector to come in and do something, because that's part of growing the economy and part of the attractiveness of doing that government to government deal. So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular topic, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. Bye for now.